Marriage and Family Centre in the Catholic Archdiocese of Sydney. She completed her undergrad at Camping College in Liberal Arts, majoring in philosophy, and is currently doing her Masters of Philosophy at Notre Dame. She's passionate about using philosophy as a tool for reasoned discussion on issues relating to life, marriage and family. This will be a lovely talk, and I hope we can all take something from this. There will also be a Q&A session at the end, depending on time. I added a note at the end. Savannah would come in during the Q&A session as well, and she has some background in biology and bioethics. So listen attentively and sum up some questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen, and thank you all for having me for your Life Week. It's a pleasure to be here. I spoke at last year's as well, and it was a really good experience, so I'm glad to be back. Now, some of you may know of Sherry Shepherd. She plays Angie on the comedy show 30 Rock and is also a host, or was a host, on The View. She's very talented and she's a very funny actress, but she came under fire last year for what the papers called cancelling her baby order. You see, Sherry and her husband wanted to have a baby. For whatever reason, they decided to use his sperm, a donor egg, and a surrogate mother. But during the pregnancy, Sherry and her husband split up, and now Sherry is refusing to have anything to do with the child, and she refuses to pay child support. After all, she isn't biologically related to the baby. She didn't carry the baby in her womb. She just ordered it, and now she wants to return it. Today I will be addressing the topic, brave new word, in vitro fertilisation, or IVF. I will approach the topic from a number of angles, including the teaching of the Catholic Church, but I will primarily consider the underlying philosophical assumptions that those who support IVF make and the implications of these assumptions. Now, before I begin, there are a couple of very important things that need to be said. And the first is this. The Catholic Church understands that infertility is a great burden for couples. She believes that children are the crowning glory of a marriage. She recognises that infertility can place great strain on a marriage and is a terrible burden for couples to bear. It causes suffering that goes right to the very heart of the person and to the heart of their desire for a family. But this suffering, however great, cannot justify performing immoral actions in order to have a family. Rather, Catholics must seek to support infertile couples through encouraging and promoting morally permissible means of fertility options, like NAPRO technology and natural family planning, as well as adoption. We must also reach out to couples in their struggle where we can, through prayer and friendship. The second point to make is of equal importance, and it is this. No matter how a person is conceived, he or she is always a person to be loved. They are always a person to be respected, cherished, and valued. As a Catholic, I also believe that no matter how a person is conceived, they are known and loved by God. It is of the utmost importance that we keep these 2 points in our minds throughout the rest of the discussion. So, to give you a bit of an outline of the topics we will cover, we will first consider the moral act and ask questions like, what constitutes a morally good or morally wrong act? What questions are raised when considering the morality of an action? What principles can we look to in our considerations? Through these kinds of questions, I will demonstrate how an examination of moral acts provides us with a standard by which we can judge the morality of IVF and similar reproductive technologies. In our examination, we will also look at what the Catholic Church teaches about IVF, with a particular focus on the relationship between procreation and marital love, as well as the dignity of the human person. We will also consider how IVF commercialises children and donors, as well as a whole host of other issues that arise as a result of IVF. So the morality of an act. Any moral act has three significant components: intention, means, and end. The intention is the desire or reasoning behind whatever it is we intend to do. The second component, the means, is what we do in order to complete the act. And the third component is the end, which is the consequences or result of the act, but it also includes significant circumstances. So one line of philosophical thought holds that an act is morally permissible so long as the intention is good. Those who subscribe to this view are intentionalists. For an intentionalist, as long as you have a good intention, even if you do something bad, what you did was not morally wrong because of your good intention. There are also those who believe that an act is morally permissible so long as the consequences are good. Those who subscribe to this line of thought are called consequentialists. For the consequentialist, as long as the consequences are good, your intention and the means by which you performed the act are not morally significant. In other words, consequentialism is the view that the means justifies the end justifies the means. So let's take a moment to think about the implications of intentionalism and consequentialism, since neither of these place significant moral value on the means by which the act is performed. We see intentionalists and consequentialists all the time, particularly in the reproductive technology industry. Last year, Janie Cornwell's story about how she travelled to the US for gender selection IVF was all over the internet. Non-medical gender selection is illegal in Australia, so that's why she had to travel over to the US. Janie used a form of IVF known as pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, or PGD, where the embryos are screened for gender or abnormalities prior to implantation in the womb. So in Janie's case, 2 eggs were fertilised, creating the 2 human embryos, and then they were screened to determine their gender. One was male, the other female. The female embryo was then implanted in Janie's womb, and she donated the male embryo, her son, to another family. When Janie's story was reported, the focus was placed on how much Janie had yearned for a little girl, how she already had 3 boys, and how, when the last boy was born, she was so devastated that he wasn't the little girl she had always craved that she even considered aborting him. Janie maintained that she was crippled by what she called gender disappointment. The articles went on to talk about how happy Janie is now that she has her little girl. Her family is complete. Never mind that the son she donated would probably be born by now, and never mind that when he is older, he may find out that he was created only so that his mother could have a girl. Never mind that he was not the result of his parents' love and was not wanted because he was a boy. Never mind all that. Janie has her baby girl now. If we take a look at Janie's thought process behind her decision, we will see that she uses a mix of intentionalism and consequentialism to justify her actions. Janie is quoted as saying, "If you want something bad enough, always try to get it. Never let fear get in the way of your goal, of the goal you have yourself. Never let other people's opinions affect your decision. It's about what you want and what makes you happy." It's about what you want and what makes you happy. It's not about how you get that. Now, we're not talking about some kind of morally neutral goal like running a marathon. We're talking about creating human life. For Janie, the ethics of her actions didn't matter. The means did not matter. It was all about her desires and the end result. For Janie and other intentionalists and consequentialists, there is a denial of the fact that it is never morally permissible to do something that is morally wrong so that good may come of it, or because of a good intention. For many of us, the idea that the end does not justify the means seems simple enough, and yet we see countless examples every day of the significance of the morality of the means being disregarded or downplayed owing to the circumstances, consequences, or intentions of a person. Abortion is another example of the means of an act being disregarded. Many people hold that abortion is a necessary evil, something bad but unavoidable. Such people believe that abortion is not a good thing and they wish there were less abortions, but they hold that it should be an option available to women in very difficult situations. This line of thought completely disregards the moral significance of the means and instead places all of the emphasis on the intention and circumstances of the mother. In some ways, this view is even more problematic because it does recognise the wrongness of the act itself, but then places an extreme emphasis on the intention and consequences with the view that these justify committing a morally wrong act. The Catholic Church, on the other hand, recognises that it is never morally permissible to do something that is in itself morally wrong, no matter how difficult the circumstances or consequences, and no matter how good the intention. Catholics hold that a morally good act must involve a good intention, a good means, which is ordered towards a good end. It is not sufficient that a person have a good intention and good end if the means by which they achieve it are morally wrong. Such an act overall would be morally impermissible. Likewise, a good means and a good end do not make an act morally good if the intention is bad. For me, this kind of standard of evaluation makes a lot of sense. It makes sense that when we evaluate a moral act, we evaluate the whole moral act. We should take into consideration the morality of the intention, the morality of the means, and the morality of the end, which includes the circumstances. It does not make sense to put all the emphasis on any single component alone, and it certainly does not make sense to disregard the means by which something is done. So these three parts of the moral act, intention, means, and end, are the standard by which Catholics judge the morality of an action, and in this case, the morality of IVF and similar reproductive technologies. So what is it about IVF that makes it immoral in the eyes of the Church? Let's take a look at a simple breakdown of the whole act of IVF. What's the intention of IVF? The intention is to have a child. What is the means of IVF? The means is the creation of a human embryo using a sperm and an egg in a petri dish before implantation in the womb. What is the end of IVF? If all goes according to plan, it is the conception and birth of a child. This is an extremely simplified and almost ideal view of an IVF situation, and yet the Catholic Church recognises that there is still something very morally wrong with the means. In this example, there is nothing immoral about the intention to have a child. This is a good desire, and one that many couples share. Children are a magnificent part of marriage. The end in itself is not morally wrong either. The conception and birth of a child is a good thing. An intentionalist will say that IVF is morally permissible because the intention to have a child, is good. A consequentialist will say that IVF is morally permissible because the consequence, actually having a child, is good. But neither of these approaches are very satisfactory because both neglect the importance of the morality of the means, of the act itself. So what is it about the means of IVF that is morally wrong? Well, the Catholic Church upholds the vital and natural link between procreation and the marital act. The Church teaches that sexual intercourse is the total and mutual self-giving of the spouses, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Furthermore, the Church holds that any children that come from this unique union are a wonderful gift and the crowning glory of a marriage. In other words, sex and babies go together. Actions which assist or help a married couple to conceive a child, like medical treatments for hormone levels and those sorts of things, are morally permissible because they in no way replace or substitute for the marital act itself. And this is the first major issue that the Church has with IVF. Procreation is inherently linked to sexual intercourse. It is through the loving embrace of a child's parents that he comes to be in this world, and this is a good means. However, in the case of IVF, the link between procreation and the marital act is severed. Children conceived in this way are not the fruit of the loving embrace of their parents, but rather are made by scientists in a petri dish. The petri dish conception replaces the natural conception by mutual self-giving love. IVF is wrong because the means by which the child is conceived actually replaces the ordinary good means by which procreation naturally occurs. It's interesting, in Huxley's Brave New World, one of the things that readers found so disturbing was that in a society in which the story is set, the link between sex and children is strongly discouraged. All the people are encouraged to have sex regularly and with many different partners, and meanwhile, children are made in labs. The words mother and father in Brave New World are tantamount to swear words. In Brave New World, the relationship between sex and children is completely severed, and this was extremely disturbing when people read the book initially, and it's not so far away now. I remember the first time that the importance of the link between procreation and sex really hit home for me. Intellectually, I knew the reasons that the Church had for opposing IVF, and I agreed with them very firmly. But in this particular instance, it really enabled me to my heart to catch up with my head. I was attending a presentation about IVF as part of my marriage preparation. During the presentation, a slide came up with two images. One image was an IVF conception. It was a microscopic image of an egg being fertilised in a glass jar, and I thought, my goodness, a baby is being made. I remember feeling amazed because it was an image of life being created, but at the same time I was disturbed because I had this really strong feeling that something was missing. The image next to the embryo was of a couple in bed, but they were not embracing. They were lying on their sides with their backs to each other, not touching, not talking, just lying. The two images together delivered a really powerful message about the reality of IVF conception and the Church's teaching, about how IVF severs the meaningful connection between procreation and marital love. When I looked at the images again, I saw new life being created in a sterile and commercial environment without love. I saw this little one coming into the world, not as the physical fruit of the love of his or her parents, but at the gloved hands of scientists after a considerable exchange of finances. And it all seemed so wrong. Now, this was just my personal experience, and I don't expect everyone to feel the same way about that conversion of heart, but it's worth sharing nonetheless. In addition to replacing the role of married love in procreation, there are many other moral problems posed by IVF. These include the commercialisation of children, the commercialisation of donors, the freezing, storing, experimenting and destruction of human embryos, the practical mishaps that occur in IVF clinics, and a whole range of issues that come along with donor-conceived IVF, both practical and psychological. So let's take a look at some of these in a bit more depth. IVF commercialises children. One of Australia's largest IVF companies rakes in over $17 million each year in profit, with a total revenue of about $200 annually. $200 million annually. Infertile couples pay a lot of money to be able to have children, particularly if time is not on their side. and the IVF industry is ready to lend a helping hand for a price. Each round costs about $8,000 up front, with a 50% rebate from Medicare. But many couples are not successful in the first round and need to do a couple more cycles. Now, if you pay anywhere from $4,000 to $20,000 or more for a product, you are going to want to know that the product is not faulty. You want to know that the child you are paying for does not have any health issues or abnormalities. It sounds harsh, but the reality is that more and more couples are increasingly opting for a version of IVF, this procedure where they delay implanting the embryos into the womb by a few extra days, allowing the embryos to develop a bit more along with any abnormalities. This enables couples to have a kind of peace of mind that their baby will be healthy because any of the embryos that have abnormalities are discarded. Now, if a couple underwent a cycle of IVF and they had one healthy embryo and an embryo that had an extra chromosome, meaning that the baby would have Down syndrome, what do? They've paid good money for these babies. Do they really want to implant, either now or eventually, the baby that they know will have Down syndrome? I have no doubt that people with Down syndrome enrich the lives of their families in ways that they never thought possible. But many couples would be frightened about what this would mean for them, and it sounds sick, but they might think it's easier to discard the embryo now rather than implant it in the womb. In fact, already 90% of parents who are told their unborn child has Down syndrome abort that child. This commercialisation of children through IVF leads to a lack of reverence for human life. Many embryos are frozen in storage and used for scientific experiments. There is no respect for human life at this earliest stage in these kinds of matters. And this is just one of the issues that arises with IVF. The sperm and egg donor industry is booming as well, and it is at the heart of a whole host of IVF-related problems. Children from donor-conceived IVF are starting to speak out about the confusion that many of them have experienced from not knowing their biological mother or father. Donors are sharing their stories about how they started donating in the industry as a way to help families and then ended up feeling commercialised and commodified. There are those donors who have gone on to get married and have children with their spouse before the full realisation of their donations hits them too late, and they have no idea who their other children are, or in some cases, even how many there are. There are the spouses of donors who know their husband or wife has other children out there by someone else. There are the brothers and sisters who will never meet. There are even some donor-conceived kids who won't date anyone born around the same time of their conception for fear that they will be dating someone who is biologically related. There are the couples flipping through sperm and egg donor catalogues, reading the candidates' accomplishments and admiring their traits before picking one. There are the IVF clinics that mistakenly implant one couple's embryo into the womb of another woman. And there are the embryos created with the wrong man's sperm. There are women and men who are not romantically interested, but who agree to conceive a child together via IVF for the sake of one of their desires. There are the children who know that not only were they not physically conceived out of the love of their parents, but also know that their parents do not love each other, and in some cases do not even know each other. There was a couple who last year enraged the online community worldwide when they spoke about the anger they felt when they found out that despite only wanting to add one child to their family, they were having IVF twins. There are the recent developments that open the door to 3-parent babies, children who have the DNA of 3 people instead of 2. There are a whole host of major moral issues that are facing us as a society as a result of IVF, and it really is starting to look like a brave new world. It is very difficult to argue against many of these developments on rational grounds if there is no significance given to the means by which an act is done. If we remain intentionalist and consequentialist in our moral evaluations, we will not have a leg to stand on. There will always be a couple suffering from infertility, or a couple worried that they will pass a genetic disability onto their child, who share their suffering publicly and assure the world that they would be so happy if they had access to the next big thing in reproductive technology, never mind the ethics involved. This is something that our society is going to have a robust discussion about sooner or later, because through IVF, we have opened a Pandora's box. Welcome to a brave new world. Thank you everyone for listening so patiently. I'd like to invite Silvana up, and if anyone has any questions, we'll take those.
What would you say would be the ethics of a situation where you have a situation where, say, a lady is working in an IVF clinic and the doctors want to dispose of a fertilized embryo, and rather than let it be destroyed and lose the embryo, the lady says, "I'll take the embryo in my body." What would you say is the morality of that sort of situation?
No one take that one? I think one of the things that we need to look at when we're analysing all the various situations and scenarios that come up is the principles behind things. So in that particular situation, you've got, the child's already been conceived. It's a fertilised embryo. The child's already been conceived. It could be the lesser of two evils, I suppose. Yeah. Next question. Yes.
Yes, how would you respond to couples that I guess are exceptions to the generalizations that surround IVF in the Catholic Church? So let's say you've got a couple who is in a loving relationship, but I don't know, one of them ends up having cancer, and IVF is one of the only ways that they would be able to have their own child.
Yes.
How would you, I guess, speak to couples like that? What would you say to them? Like, that it's just tough, deal with it, like, you can't have a child.
Just said my experience.
I think, no, thank you. That's a really good question, because it's one of the most sort of common experiences for couples who can't have kids, whether that's through something as tragic as cancer or because one or both of them is infertile. And there are ways that we can talk to people about how when something is wrong, regardless of contributing factors, we can't do something that is in and of itself wrong. I know a number of married couples who are very much in love, would make amazing parents, and they can't have kids. And it has been a great suffering for many of them, and they found other ways that they can contribute as sort of either sort of spiritual mothers and fathers, looking after other people and, being a mentor. They've now, this particular couple I have in mind, have adopted some kids from, I think it's Sudan, and having a lot of new challenges by having an instant family, but they're doing really well. So there's a lot of other options out there, adoption as well, and we need to be mindful that we can never do something wrong so that the consequences may be good. Yes.
I'd just like to make the comment that I think you start off with a very rigid concept of good and bad, because you seem to assume that the only good lies in marriage and having children, and then you therefore have to assume that no love resides anywhere else. And it seems to me that that is an incredibly arrogant, authoritarian, not to say completely unsuccessful position, because other people who don't have the same kind of dominating view of life as you have know that love resides in all sorts of places, with all sorts of people, and that many ways in which children have historically been brought into the world have absolutely nothing to do with love in terms of the way they are conceived, and have absolutely nothing to do with love,
Certainly.
the way
Well,
they experience life. So you're part of the problem. You're an authoritarian relic of yesteryear.
well, thank you for your comment. I do agree that there are certainly different forms of love. The question becomes whether or not the law and we as a society sanction immoral actions in order to create life.
Immoral actions.
Immoral actions,
Which
yes.
you've decided from the wisdom of your years and your capacity to evaluate all the people of the world, their faiths, their troubles, their behaviours.
The view that I've put forward is the view that the Church, in her wisdom, has promulgated for...
In her wisdom, the Church in his wisdom.
Thank you for your comment. Was there a question up the back? Yes.
Does IVF always result in the loss of embryos?
Not always. If, for example, if you... generally, they will implant more than one embryo in the hope of at least one of them taking off. But if you implant 2 embryos into a woman's womb and you get twins, that's not a loss of life in that one, no.
Just to follow up, when the embryos are, when they're in their frozen state, they're kind of like a frozen soul. Could that be argued?
Well, with Catholics, yeah, we believe that from the moment of conception.
So, because putting that frozen soul into through the means of IVF to a womb would feature unnatural conception. Well, not unnatural conception, unnatural, I guess, the processes which follow and caused it. But leaving it in its frozen state is leaving it like frozen embryo. What's Church teaching on that?
You might be better with that one, frozen embryos. I mean, it's certainly not supported. But
Sorry, can you just clarify, like, exactly what your question is? Sorry, like, what's the Church's stance on frozen embryos?
So if you have a fertility doctor that becomes Catholic and they have a stock of frozen embryos, what can they do with that? Can they leave it there and let the souls be frozen? Do they have to dispose of it? Or should they, if no embryos are lost, should they use those embryos for conception, for birth?
I'm not entirely sure what the Church's stance is on what to do with frozen embryos. I guess it kind of relates back to your question with regards to what do you then do with frozen embryos. So I guess like you need to consider how the child's been conceived. So I guess like the means to then conceive the child, and then so you've obviously got that act or immorality of that, and then you've also got I guess like the fact of then the implantation as well. So I'm not entirely sure what Church teaching is, because you could say that obviously there's heaps of embryos frozen, then there's heaps of like human.
And is the moral wrong in conceiving that embryo? Is keeping it stored frozen morally wrong, or implanting it? Is that morally wrong?
I would say if you had a situation where, say, you have a couple and they've got 2 more IVF embryos in storage, frozen, and then they converted to Catholicism and suddenly realised, because the evil has already been done, it would be the lesser of 2 evils, and it would probably come under what we call the principle of double effect. So the intention is to give this child life, as opposed to leaving it in storage, and in that way it could potentially be justifiable. Yes?
What are the actual success rates with IVF?
They vary. They're not great, and they're not as great as you would often expect. There's also a real problem with people being referred to IVF prematurely. So I was speaking to one natural fertility practitioner, and she said that she's had girls come to her after they've been through IVF because that was what was recommended to them straight off because they were having a bit of difficulty. And she didn't need IVF. Her problem was something that could be solved very easily. But depending on the age of the woman, the health of her eggs, whether or not she's using a donor egg, all of those things are contributing factors. So it's not, I think the first cycle you've got about 50% success rate, half,
Yeah.
but then all those other factors come in as well. It's not great success rates. Yes.
What about children who are born in IVF, like the IVF generation?
Yeah.
How do you, like, it's gonna be hard to tell them that IVF is wrong. Like, how do you deliver that? Like, especially since more and more people are gonna be born in IVF.
Yeah.
How do we tell them?
I mean, it's certainly not their fault or anything like that, and the church teaches that, every single person, no matter how they are conceived, is a person to be loved. So there's that aspect. It seems like there's a lot of people coming out and talking about their experiences as an IVF child, whether that's, most of them are donor conceived, but then there are also people who know they've IVF conceived and that somehow is affecting them, just knowing that. So I think we have to deal with it very pastorally, very lovingly, and just be there for support. And we need to, there's a lot of, we need to be their voice as well now, for the future kids to come as well. All good? All right, well thank you everyone for having me, and then Silvana as well. It's been a real pleasure and very interesting, and hopefully I'll see you guys next year.
Thank you, Finelle, for the wonderful discussion and things that you've opened us across on Christian IVF, surrogacy, stories, and how it affects the human person, the dignity of the person, of every conception. And especially relating to our work today, I could safely say that we've taken something from this, and we could open up discussion in our own lives. And I would like to see this as a
Thank you.